Evening all. Let's have a look at another classic game, this time by Akiba Rubinstein, and this was played in Lodz 1907. Some background on Rubinstein is available on Wiki. Okay, so he was a Polish chess grandmaster at the beginning of the 20th century. He was actually scheduled to play a match with Emanuel Lasker for the World Championship in 1914, but it was cancelled because of the outbreak of World War I. In his youth, he astonished the chess world, defeating many players including Capablanca and Schlechter. However, his later life was plagued by mental illness. Rubinstein was actually famous for his endgames as well, very strong in rook and pawn endings, among other endings. And in this game, though, it didn't go into an endgame. Georg Rotlewi was his opponent. And although starting with a solid set of moves, d4 by Georg, and it was answered by d5, Akiba classically, and now a very solid knight f3 move, and Akiba returned the solidness with e6, voluntarily blocking in his bishop. Sometimes the bishop will be deployed later on the diagonal. And it's very nice if this is open up in scope, if this pawn is able to capture at some point for this bishop to be activated along that diagonal. For the moment, though, it looks a bit like a French defence, or at least the structure of black. And white is also playing a kind of French defence structure in reverse with e3. In fact, in the club match last night, I noticed my good friend Alex was playing the King's Head board one, who used this system, a strong FIDE master, McMichael, and later, McMichael had put the bishop on this fianchetto line. So even though the bishop's temporarily blocked in by the pawn on e3, it seems also this one's blocked in. They're both heading often for this fianchetto to compensate for being imprisoned by their own pawn structure. So I think that's the theory of this. Okay, so black now decides, Akiba decides to play c5. Now it does try and encourage a move like c3, which would rule out a fianchetto being as effective as the pawn's blocking in that bishop on b2. So how does white react to c5? I think this was a good energetic reply, not to play c3, to play c4 in fact. So white's keeping a lot of tension in the centre, and there's threats of both sides, of course, to take each other's pawns at the moment, and the central tension is maintained now with Akiba's next move, knight c6, and we have knight c3, so a fully symmetrical position with both sides sharing the strategic issue of this potentially locked in queenside bishop. So at the moment, of course, the game is about equal, with white having the advantage of the extra move, of course, being white. So knight f6. But I think this advantage of the first move in playing white is squandered now, and it starts off with this next move, which is not really respecting tempo that much. Maybe white considers it's a closed game, it's not that open, and tempo is not so important. But actually it can be, if tactical vulnerabilities can be exposed as they were in this game. This next move, d takes c5, really suffers from the issue it's not waiting for the bishop to be deployed to e7 or d6 to be able to make the bishop move again to recapture on c5. Instead, black is given the opportunity to develop in one go, because white plays now d takes c5. So black's developing the bishop in one go. But white's logic may have been that the bishop anyway can be used as a tempo gain after a3 and b4, which would not only fianchetto this bishop, but gain a tempo on that bishop anyway. So maybe white was thinking that wasn't such a big deal, and he pursues his plan now to gain a tempo on that bishop. But it could have been more safely carried out if he had just played a3, for example, as a quiet waiting move. And if black wants to play this tempo gain, game, to avoid, you know, losing time with the bishop, black might try the symmetrical waiting move here, a3. But white can be very clever here, and in fact avoid d takes c4 being the subject of tempo gain. If white plays bishop d3 again, we've got the same kind of trick going on. White could play b3 here to give the option of b takes. So here now d takes c4 I think could be answered by b takes c4 quite safely, and it's a small advantage according to Houdini. So one has to be very careful in these symmetrical situations with tempo. That's one lesson already, that it seems white is not using a key waiting move here, okay, because already it's about this bishop and not losing time with the bishop. So that kind of concession is in black's favour now, to play bishop takes c5 in one go. Okay, and now white, okay, plays a3, but after a6, you know, the bishop has now got this fine diagonal to remain lurking on from a7 with a view on the king side. And if ever white plays e4 later, of course this bishop's going to be extended in scope and potentially useful across this diagonal. So here white plays b4, okay, gaining a little bit of tempo. But actually the bishop now doesn't go to a7, it goes actually to d6. Okay, so at the moment, what is the evaluation of the position? Has white really lost critical tempo at move 9? No, actually it's about equal. But white has to be careful not to sort of give black a free move for dc and b5. And actually his next move is a good move actually, bishop b2. It avoids bishop e2 or d3. Bishop b2 is again about equal, so in the circumstances that's a good move. If he plays bishop d3, then actually this starts to be even better for black according to Houdini. So what has happened here after bishop e2 is that it's black's move, and okay, the bishop, we could move the bishop back to d3 just for the sake of symmetry, but it will be black to move. And with black to move here, there's actually quite a powerful move to make sure when white castles that h2 will be weaker, to remove this defensive knight on f3, to make h2 a bit more of an Achilles heel in white's position. And the move which could be played here is knight e5 immediately, or it could be prepared with bishop b7. So say knight e5 immediately, and you know there's a problem here. Well, bishop b7 covers against white playing now knight e4. So what black has done with the move is actually weaken white's king side. So when he castles, h2 is weaker. So that's a real pain here. Now the engine recommendation is to actually block this bishop. Things have got that bad apparently. So what if castles, you might wonder? Well, queen c7 and black's advantage is increasing. He's double attacking h2 and c3. So the tempo has made a big difference already in this game, that actually in this position with black to move, black actually stands better with knight e5. Already white's king safety for castling is in question just because black has the move here. So these tempo have really added up to something of great significance. But anyway, if we go back to the game, so bishop b2, fine, castles. But now, okay, if white wants to avoid a tempo loss for the bishop, he could still play c takes d, and that would have the advantage, well, twofold. It would be an isolated queen's pawn, and this bishop wouldn't be so venomous on this diagonal later if it's blocked in by its own pawn. So it would change the nature of the game. If this bishop has to go on this diagonal, the nature of the game is different. It looks like an isolated queen pawn situation, with white having a comfortable blockade square on d4, and from an engine point of view this would be okay, about equal. But in the game, unfortunately, white played queen d2, and this has been criticised with players' annotations at the time, or near the time of the game. Carl Schlechter writes about this at the time of the game. A very bad place for the queen. The best continuation was c takes, e takes, bishop e2 followed by castling. And he's right, you know, that would be a good continuation, very solid. But with queen d2, the queen's going to be misplaced because black is going to be opening up that d file and putting a rook there, and it will be a subject to a tempo game. And we see in many of these classic Immortal games that the queen seems to be at the root of many evils for gaining critical tempo, which turns into a vicious kingside attack. And here is another classic with the queen being a subject of potential tempo gain on the d file. In the classic Fischer game, we saw the queen being a subject of tempo gain when Fischer won his Brilliancy when he was 13 years old. But here the queen, okay, at the moment it's not immediately apparent that this d file will be so excellent for black. This next move prepares the game more time. Queen e7 is neatly tucking the queen more effectively than on d2, so black has improved on the symmetry of the position, because often d takes and e5 will be useful anyway for e4 to liberate this bishop, and the queen can later even go to e5 in some lines. That looks like a Slav defense pattern which players in the Slav defense often use. The queen on e7 seems very good indeed. It's no problem that the bishop's hasn't got the retreat diagonal. If white tries to exploit the retreat diagonal by playing c5, I think the bishop could just retreat on this diagonal now, either c7 or b8, and that's both apparently favourable for black. Apparently this bishop c7 might be a bit more flexible. So here we could have rook d8, say white castles, and e5, and we have a very nice attacking formation of the bishops across the white king. And if e4 to dislodge the knight, we have h2 being highlighted as a tactical vulnerability. a6 is also proving useful here against b5 as well. So that would be a very nice position for black. So queen e7 doesn't suffer from too many bad side effects of blocking in the bishop, and it's waiting to pounce another tempo off white. So white plays bishop d3. His best again would probably be to take on d5 to create the isolated queen's pawn position again, and even possible, in fact, would be to take this pawn on d5, apparently, unless we need to go deeper. So this looks like an interesting gambit from black. I think black has enough intuitively, and it looks about equal or better for black here. So queen e7 is actually inviting a gambit, actually. If we go back to this position, that the d pawn is on. Schlechter writes, actually, a fine sacrifice of a pawn. And he writes that after cd, ed, knight takes, queen takes, rook d8, he went as far as rook d8 and evaluated this position as black having a strong attack. Okay. So basically, okay, we'll go back to the game. White didn't want to accept that gambit, and he's run out of waiting moves, actually. That's the unfortunate thing now. But his best, as I said, maybe actually not to accept the gambit, but to still take. And if he wants to play safer, it might be possible just to play bishop e2 here. Or is it to not accept the gambit? At least he wouldn't be wasting tempo with this bishop. So say rook d8 and he castles, and the advantage is minimized, but black still is a little bit better here. Fractionally, just fractionally, tiny, about equal really. So this was the best continuation if he didn't want to accept the gambit. But no, he loses another tempo, unfortunately. He plays bishop d3, and now black can force a symmetrical pawn structure. He can play d takes c4, unless white wants to sacrifice a pawn, which would look pretty unsound actually, just to move the bishop back and give black a whole pawn, you know, supported after b5. White is obliged now to recapture. After b5, the symmetry is there. And okay, where can the bishop move here? Let's add an engineering bit to here. Is actually bishop b3 out of the question, not to have an entirely symmetrical position? Again, the thing is, knight e5 seems to be a good freeing move for black with pressure. If white dares the castle queen side, you might ask, bishop b7 starts to get a bit uncomfortable. Say white tries to sacrifice the g pawn, bishop g2. It's not really that convincing. Bishop f3, not really convincing. The king is not that safe, and also black might even be a bit carnivorous to take more pawns here. Okay. The bishop going to b3 is interesting, but really wouldn't help that much. So the bishop goes to d3, and now rook d8 is threatening nasty things to do with that poor queen on d2. So if white's castled routinely here, let's have a look here at how the importance of tempo has an impact. Then actually there's a move to win a pawn here. I wonder, win a pawn? You might ask, really? Bishop takes h2 check. So clearly if king takes, then it's a clear win of a pawn with check, and then queen takes d3, and there's no refutation of that. But you might ask, what about knight takes here? The problem with knight takes is knight e5. And again, this pin on the poor queen means that actually white's worse. Say he plays knight takes b5, attacking the knight. Knight takes d3, knight d4. The knight could take the bishop, the queen could recapture. And black will be slightly better here, even though it's equal on pawns after queen d6. This bishop has a nice diagonal to work with in this position. Black's slightly better. Okay, so he's not winning a pawn if white's tactical like that, but it's just better for black. Anyway, white decides to move the queen away from that d file with queen e2, but black is now clearly better after bishop b7. Well, significantly better, and it's made a lot worse now for white with this accurate move, knight e5. Now, it's basically this was introduced by Marshall and Schlechter in a similar position with opposite colours, but here with the extra move, rook d8. So this extra move, so it's not totally symmetrical, and black's got in this move, which basically is undermining white's kingside safety already with this coordinated attack on f3. So black is like, not only as though he's playing white, he's also got this extra rook move in, which is also pretty useful. So it's pretty nasty, this position, because with this extra rook move of rook d8, white plays knight takes e5, because he has an idea to at least parry this bishop on the diagonal by trying for f4. The thing is, this h2 is looking a bit scary now, because actually there is an immediate threat of bishop takes h2 and queen d6 to win a pawn. So, okay, what is white's best here? Maybe f4 is almost mandatory to do something about that threat, but black would stand better with those raking bishops on the diagonals. But if white, say, tried g3, then intuitively we would say, well, black is really dominating that diagonal and the weaknesses. In fact, queen d6 gains a tempo, and now the queen can actually go onto that diagonal and force another pawn move, and it starts to look really bad actually. Bishop takes c3, white's forced to play this to maintain material equality. Now knight takes e4, and black in this combination sequence would be slightly better. But actually this is opposite coloured bishops and probably better than the game continuation. Anyway, it's only like a pawn disadvantage. In the gamed continuation with f4, bishop c7 was played. So black's bishops look very nice, and okay, it looks as though white solved an issue at least with this dark square bishop, pointing at h2, a kind of Achilles heel, without the defensive knight on f3, which black has got the equivalent of for his h7. But now things are made a lot worse, a lot worse with white's next move. Instead of trying to keep solid and minimise losses, play lesser evil moves. Instead, another weakening move was played. Rook ad1 would be more prudent than what was played, at least getting back symmetry of some sort, protecting d3. Black would still be better after e5. So say h3, rook e8, there's a threat of e takes now. So say f5 to close down that threat. And it's not such a bad disadvantage for white in theory. Black's better, but it's not clearly winning just yet. There's life in the position still. So unfortunately, white played e4, and this just makes things a lot worse. This e4. Basically, e4, this diagonal is now useful for driving the king onto an unfortunate square h1, where of course this bishop is going to love that king on the diagonal, and this pawn's going to end up being pinned. So this is about to happen after rook ac8, which is directly exerting pressure, of course, on c3 potentially. Now here, white plays a further weakening move, which was unnecessary as well. He played e5, weakening this diagonal even further. A lesser evil move here. This knight's not really a tactical issue at the moment. Surely, you could say king h1, bishop b6. It's protected anyway at the moment. So it's not such a big deal again. The advantage may be less than the pawn, but black has active operations available, like actually h5, which would support knight g4 and the crude queen h4, which is crude but effective, like in elephant gambit type games which you've seen on this channel. With the absence of the knight on f3, of course h2 is a subject of easier attack, so moves like h5 are more justified in this position, just going for an attack, even if white didn't weaken himself further. But no, white simplifies black's attacking task by creating even more weaknesses, and the bishops are really loving these diagonals now. Check, and we just can bask in the bishops, looking at them. These bishops are absolutely gorgeous and functional and complementary. There's already aesthetic beauty in black's position, and look at the two rooks as well, blasting down on these pieces. But white's king is compromised here. No defensive knight on f3, facing the gaze in particular of this bishop on the diagonal. So clearly black is better, and can also make use of this tactical vulnerability now, this bishop on d3 with his next move. So his next move is knight g4, and it's starting to be really unpleasant. Okay. Schlechter writes there's no defence, and gives an example here of bishop takes h7, king takes, queen takes. Unfortunately here there's rook d2, emphasising b2 and g2. So that's pretty nasty. That would be losing in that position. Or say the knight was trying to be evicted with h3. Then here there's queen h4. In this position, queen takes, h takes. There's rook takes d3, not only attacking this knight to threaten to win material, but threatening Rook H3 mate, which would be mate. Look at this, Rook H3 would be mate. So that's no good either. So this shows the real power of knight G4. What can be done here? Not bishop takes, not H3. Okay, let's look at queen takes G4. There's rook takes D3. Threatening. Well, the knight is going to have to move here. So knight E2, but now rook C2, and a lot of pressure is emerging here. Bishop C1. And in this position, G6 is apparently strong. But let's engine check this. This is Schlechter's comments to see actually is there anything stronger after queen takes G4. Queen takes G4 with engine technology. Is there a crushing combination here? Rook takes D3, agreed. Knight E2, Rook C2, agreed. Bishop C1. There is something stronger. In fact, okay, Rook C2 is one of the strongest. In fact, in this position, H5 is also coming up as a key resource available to black, which is emphasized here. Instead of G6, which was mentioned by Schlechter, threatening H5, just H5 immediately. H5 immediately. What's going on here? H5, queen takes H5, say. There's an absolute crusher in this position, in this variation. I wonder if you can spot it. And this was missed by Carl Schlechter, a great attacking player, why H5 immediately is not on the cards. G6 is not bad. It's still a big advantage for black. There's still a menacing threat of H5 now. Because once that, where is that queen going? It's like, you know, it's only got like G5, and that would be very unpleasant. Okay. But can you spot why H5 is working after queen takes H5? What would be the move here? Whoops, I think I've given it away with this analysis engine on. So let's say it. Bishop takes G2, king takes, queen B7 check, the queen taking over on that diagonal. And what can white do here? Once he interposes, he's locking out the protection of the knight. Rook takes E2 check. And white's position is falling to bits. Bishop F2. Rook takes F3. End of game, really. It's a forced mate in 4 now. Black's hugely material up now as well. So basically, in that position, it seems queen takes G4. There's a very sharp refutation after knight G4. Okay, starting with rook D3 and rook C2 and then H5. What else was there after knight G4? What else did Schlechter mention of interest? So he mentioned H3. He mentioned queen G4. Knight E4 was also mentioned. Now in this position, queen H4 threatens mate on H2. If H3, now here there's a real crusher. Rook takes D3. According to Schlechter, queen takes, bishop takes E4, queen takes, and now queen G3, threatening mate on H2, and forcibly basically opening up the H file to be mated with queen H4. So this looks like some of my recent Warzone attacks with H2 in the Elephant Gambit. With that absence of the knight on F3, all of these H2 mating net patterns arise. Let's just engine check that for clinical accuracy, if there's anything even better after knight E4. Queen H4 is actually given us the strongest move. Also rook D3 and knight H2 mentioned. So rook takes D3, he's absolutely right. Bishop E4, he's absolutely right. So if queen takes, he's absolutely right, queen g3. It's an absolute forced mate. Absolute clinical accuracy already. This variation from the past, mentioned by Schlechter. Okay. So, in the game, what was the defence then played to knight g4, the attempt? In the game, bishop e4 was played. At least trying to parry that bishop. But now, we have queen h4, so with the queen and knight lurking over the white king, without the defensive knight on f3, you know something's up here. This is really bad news. This looks like a crude, crushing attack about to happen. In this position, g3 was played. h3 doesn't fare much better, actually. If h3 had been played, now in this position, rook takes c3, so there's no time for queen g4 here, because this pawn's pin, rook h3, will be devastating because of that pawn being pinned on the diagonal. So say bishop takes c3, bishop takes e4. We have a remarkable tactic here. Queen takes, pawn takes. Black, to play and win, would simply in this position play rook d3 to the tactical vulnerability here being exploited, along with rook h3 being threatening mate. So black is going to be material up here with the two bishops for the rook. So that was if h3 was played. But no, Georg, unfortunately, he plays an inferior move to h3. h3 might be one of the better tries here. In fact, that's given us one of the strongest tries. As well as queen takes g4. Just giving up the queen, which seems a bit desperate to give up the queen for two pieces just to get rid of this knight and bishop. But h3 is given as the try, basically. So after g3, the evaluation, as you see, is totally even worse. So g3, so things are reaching the limit here. Okay, the limit of king safety has been reached and exceeded beyond the safety limits. Black now plays really crushingly and tactically. I wonder if you can spot this next move if I give you 10 seconds, or you may wish to stop the video. So 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, you don't have to listen always to the opponent's threats, especially in a superior position with raking bishops at the opponent's king. You can stop listening to them sometimes. You've created conditions for breaking artificial rules. So rook takes c3 was the first in sequence, offering up the queen. Beautiful queen sacrifice. And after g takes h4, believe it or not, this is an absolute forced mate in 8 moves, and it's beautiful. Can you spot the next move now, which is absolutely crushing? There's one move which is totally crushing here. So if I give you 10 seconds starting from now, or you might want to stop the video. Okay. Rook d2, really celebrating these absolutely raking bishops on the diagonal. Beautiful bishops coordinated, beautiful coordination as well with the rooks. The symphony of the pieces is remarkable. All of black's pieces working wonderfully together here. What does white do? Well, in the game he tried queen takes d2. Nothing much really helps, actually. If he tries other things, let's see. Queen takes g4, It's just the faster mate. Bishop takes e4 check. Rook takes f3. And it's pretty brutal, threatening double check and mate. So if white wants to prolong, he'd just give up this queen. It's ridiculous. There's no real defence here. If queen g2 getting in the way, then check. We could speed up the mate here with bishop takes g2. Execution with the two bishops. So queen takes g4 doesn't really do anything. Rook f2. These are all helpless moves. So let's just follow the game continuation now. Queen takes d2. Bishop takes e4 check, forcing basically queen g2. Now in this position, okay, the rook's attacked. You might ask, could black have just taken the queen? If black takes the queen, that would be a very big blunder here actually. The evaluation would be about equal, black only slightly better. So say he wins that bishop. King g3 attacks the knight, you see. So that's why you need to be very accurate, even if you have an overwhelming position and you completely outplayed the opponent. You don't want that the opponent slip out with inaccurate attacking moves. No, the crushing, accurate move here was played, which really made this game immortal in terms of being talked about, you know, for a long time to come. So this was in 1907, this game, more than 100 years ago. And this final move is of great beauty as well, celebrating the raking bishops at white's king. I wonder if you can spot it, if you haven't seen clues from engine analysis already. I'll give you 10 seconds here, or you might want to pause the video starting from now. Okay, rook h3, going for the mate, using the pinned queen. What can white do here? If he plays queen takes e4, we have rook takes h2 mate. These guys are coordinating beautifully for the mating net, weaving that mating net around the white king. What does white do here? How does he defend this position? Let's just check for any weird and unusual defences. Bishop d4 is mentioned, it's only a time waster. Bishop takes d4, we have the same position. Another time wasting move, just giving up more material again, bishop f2. Facing the inevitable execution basically. There's nothing here of significance. So in this position, George resigned. This combination was described as a very impressive attacking combination. Perhaps the most magnificent combination of all time. Carl Schlechter wrote this. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope the aesthetic beauty was impressive for you and enjoyable. Let's have a quick overview and summary. So the tactical disasters, the prelude was this tempo losing mistakes. The tempo losing mistakes gave black a symmetrical position almost, with black to move and able to weaken white's kingside in advance by getting rid of the defensive knight on f3. So it's a lesson in not wasting too much tempo, because that can really backfire for your own king's safety. Key defensive pieces, taking the opportunity to remove a key defensive piece is another lesson of this game. Stopping the opponent from doing symmetrical looking maneuvers. The bishop stopped symmetrical looking similar usefully played maneuvers which would have weakened h7. That's all been prevented as well. So white really is having the cake and eating it, that expression, getting all the advantages without letting the opponent in a previously symmetrical position to equalise by similar maneuvers. In fact, white ends up creating lots more weaknesses and not playing the best, what we call lesser evil moves to minimise the advantage. In fact, because of that, the advantage is emphasized more and more and increased dramatically after knight g4. As we saw from the many variations, there's no defense. And these variations were worked out by Schlechter well before engines, you know, about 100 years ago, and he's right about most of them. But they're very forcing in nature. So the clinical accuracy is there in them. And in the game continuation, bishop e4. So the pieces are installing themselves around the white king. h3 would have been the best try, but g3 was played. There's one thing which I believe I've missed actually, that after knight g4 there is a slight question about what is the absolute best move. From an engine point of view, actually it wasn't a natural looking queen h4, but in fact in this position the engine recommendation, the top move would have been knight h2, knight takes h2, and there's some beautiful lines here actually. Bishop takes, knight takes actually threatens knight g3, forking queen and king. And if queen g4, knight e3, trying to lure the queen away from the protection of h4. The problem is, if queen h3, queen takes b7, it's still a very strong position, material up. So white tries to defend the bishop, say, with queen f3. Then we get this check, queen f2, and white's completely busted here. If takes, there's knight d1, threatening queen g1 mate, interfering with the rook's protection of g1. So that's why, from a technical point of view, engines might disagree with one of the moves here, queen h4. But what a beauty queen h4 turned out to be. So after g3, provoking more weaknesses, then exchange sack as the prelude and the queen sack at the same time. Rook d2, deflecting the queen away from the protection of e4. Going into a pin, the pin being fully celebrated, emphasizing the raking bishops against the white king. Rook h3, and there's no defense here. A beautiful finish. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.